Hi everyone, welcome back to Watch It Played Table Talk Talk Back. My name is Rodney Smith. In the last episode, we asked the question, how do you handle the slow player in your games? And we got lots of insightful responses. We're going to take a look at a few of them, so let's dive right in. Spindlebrooch says, it takes my wife 45 minutes to eat a sandwich. Drives me nuts. Davy Jones says, I have a sand timer at the table, and when someone is taking too long, too often, I throw it at their head. Okay, so they weren't all equally insightful. Let's take a look at a couple of other ones here. J.H. Land says, our gaming group has a term called analysis paralysis for those who think too long. How did I not think to mention this during the initial Table Talk episode? This is a very common term, especially amongst English-speaking gamers, because it kind of sounds clever, and does represent the situation pretty accurately. This is when you have so many good options available to you, or so many poor ones, that you're basically paralyzed, not able to make a decision about which one you should pick. And although I consider myself a relatively fast player, when I slow play, this is why analysis paralysis can sometimes get me. Mr. Ladd says, I'm often the slow player, but this is mostly due to usually being the one guy at the table that is new to the game. I don't game as much as my gamer friends, so I'm constantly the new guy, and it irks me to no end when people who know the game, and didn't necessarily teach it very well, are frustrated that my turns take longer. You know, for those of us who are conscious about game turn length, this is really something you do have to take into account. Not only is the new player having to figure out what to do on their turn, they're having to try to remember, what can I do on my turn? And am I doing this right? And there's also a little bit of pressure when you're playing with people who've already played the game well. You know, you don't want to play poorly, so you're going to take a little extra time to try to make sure you're doing the right thing. So I agree, this is definitely something that you do have to take into account, and don't make the mistake of overestimating how well you taught the game. To those of you who've played it multiple times, everything seems clear and obvious. To the new player, that can be more challenging. Eric Lucero says, one thing I wish you would have touched on is the flip side, the overly impatient players. If you think about it, the problem of the long player is relative to the patience of the rest of the players participating in the game. Some might not actually be that slow, rather the other players are too impatient. Eric, I agree with you. How do we judge something like this? Too fast, too slow? That's really going to come down to that particular group of players. If you're the one player at the table, rushing everyone else along, then you might want to just tone it down a notch, because clearly you're out of pace with the rest of the players. At the same time, if everyone else at the table is encouraging you to maybe move it along a little more, then in terms of that unwritten social contract of that group, then you're not really honoring it, and that's something you might want to consider. But as Mr. Ladd said, there should always be exceptions to that contract, or allowances for instance, the new player at the table who's just learning the game. We have to always keep that in mind. And when I say you have to, you don't have to do anything, of course. That's just my take on it. Yeah, Good says, be careful of making the assumption that a slow player is simply being inconsiderate. You'll find that they are not. It simply takes them longer to think, and they don't even realize they're doing it. Omjag Varenfisk says, I generally like it better when people are more direct and nicely ask me to hurry it up a little. If someone tried the shaming option, it would probably make me go slower in protest if I reacted to it at all. Sam says, as long as they are genuinely interested in playing the game, it doesn't bother me. It just gives me more time to plan my next move. It seems incredibly rude to exclude people from gaming because they can't strategize as fast as you. I'd rather kick those people out of the group than the slow player. I wanted to read all three of those because I think we do have these cautions here. Understanding that the slow player is not doing it often intentionally is very important. Within reason, I do try to challenge myself, not just to play games that are outside of my comfort zone, but in thinking about these comments, it makes me think that I may want to challenge myself to even adjust my playstyle sometimes outside of my comfort zone. Maybe the next time. And honestly, this conversation has got me thinking, being a little bit reflective about how I play games. And I think what I'm going to do the next time I'm sitting in a game where I'm feeling like someone's taking too long, I'm going to just try some other kind of mental exercise. Either I'm going to spend a little more time trying to piece together other people's strategies at the table. I'm going to find some other activity that's in-game to help me pass the time before I sort of react to that slower player. Because I think, ultimately, we want everyone's experience to be enjoyable. And that does mean that slow players need to be considerate of the other people at the table, but it should work both ways, ideally. The other thing I realized as well, and I wonder if you agree with me, but I have a friend that I've gamed with before, and sometimes he'll accuse me of being the slow player, and I will think to myself, no, 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 I was watching you when you were taking your turn, and you mulled it over for quite a while. I'm pretty sure we're taking the same amount of time here. And that's the thing, it's really impossible to judge these things accurately unless you get out a stopwatch, because when you're taking your turn, it's always going to feel quicker than when you're waiting for someone else to take their turn, even if you're taking the exact same amount of time. So these are things we do have to be conscious of, and I really do appreciate this feedback, because I think it does help me as a gamer think about it a little bit differently, and maybe some of you as well. Jose Salgado says, I find your response of public shaming to be somewhat arrogant, and most likely unhelpful. I know public shaming isn't going to quicken my critical thinking skills. It might, most likely, just slow me down even more. I use the term public shaming, and I almost regret it, because out of context, it could sound very mean-spirited. This is not something that I would choose to do, especially with a group of gamers that I didn't know, or if I felt they might be sensitive to this or take it in the wrong way. I do this with my gaming group, and we all know each other quite well, and I think we all respond to it reasonably well in the spirit it's intended, to be a light kind of way of encouraging people to move along when they are taking too long with their turn. But as Jose says, this is a risky tactic, because you could be offending someone and even harming their ability to make their decisions quicker. That said, it's not an uncommon tactic, as many of the responses indicated. Bob Fosper says, I'm typically only playing with good friends, and I think that's a key element here. So feel comfortable unabashedly teasing. Our group has come up with a tradition of punny taunts we use to hurry the offender, calling them the abominable slow man, slow tour, Hans Sloooow, Slobodan Milosevic, etc. Pretty fun metagame, thinking them up while waiting for your turn. See, I would laugh along with that. When I'm the slow player, if someone was to call me the abominable slow man, I would laugh and I would probably hurry up my turn. But again, it's very important to know your audience and your gaming group, and to only use those tactics, I think, when you know everyone is going to respond to them in a good way. Kieran Briggs said, we had one player who each turn took nearly 4 minutes to place their tile in a Carcassonne tournament. Are you serious? That would be torture. Torture. He ended up winning the tournament, but I'm sure that he actually was intentionally playing slow to throw everyone else out of their rhythm, which it did. Slow play is one thing, but using it as a tactic is borderline unsporting. I never even considered this, but other people brought this up as well. Dor Emicon blog said, it's sad that some players use slow play as a tactic when they are playing a competitive game. These people are simply to be avoided because they are damaging the gaming experience. Like I said, I didn't touch on this because it never even occurred to me that someone would do this. If I had the sense, I don't know how you'd prove this, but if I felt fairly confident, I like to think of myself as fairly competent. If I felt fairly confident that someone was doing this, I would avoid them, absolutely, and I wouldn't feel an ounce of guilt because of that. Speaking of competent, here's somebody very competent. Ricky Royal wrote in, he said, there are so many great games. The group and your friendship is so much more important than the game. If you find you have a regular player who is playing slowly, find a different great game. Save that game you love which they play slowly for another crowd. I love Mage Knight. I love playing this slow. I love chess, but I don't like blitz chess. I like to play it slowly and over the course of several days. If I want a quick game, I'll play Dominion because we all play it fast. Or even try a co-op. I agree, Ricky. If you can, what you want to do is try to pick games that work well for your group and the players that are there. I do think that there are going to be some players that you are just always going to be incompatible with. That's the nature of human beings, right? We can't all get along with everyone equally well, and some of those gamers you just are going to have to avoid if you want to have a good gaming experience yourself, because that is also important. We do have to try to honor our own part to play in the gaming experience and get something out of it. But I really agree with Ricky here. I think we should try to approach every time we sit down to play a game as a shared experience that's made comfortable and enjoyable for everyone at the table, and make sure that we've exhausted, within limits, what we can do to make that experience better for everyone else. I really felt like the feedback on this particular topic was really helpful for me. It's making me think about how I approach these issues in games, and I appreciate that. So thank you for writing in your comments. One thing I was very pleased to see is that we all agree on one thing. That player who grabs their smartphone and disappears into it when it isn't their turn, that drives us all crazy. So if you're that player at the table and you think, everyone's fine with it, no one's ever called me on it, you just got your answer. They just haven't called you on it yet. Alright, well, as usual, we got a variety of great video responses as well. I'm going to leave you with a sample of those to watch. See you next week for another episode of Table Talk. Until then, thanks for watching.
Hey Rodney, it's Keith Collins, responding to Table Talk. What do I tend to do when I have a slow player?
I think I'll be the first to admit I am a slow player. That's right. But the thing is, I know it, and therefore I actively do things to compensate for that. For example, if you've seen my last video, I actually talk about phone apps, and my favorite one is an unofficial Spacehawk app called Space Clock. I would take it out, especially for new groups, and I would say that this 30-second clock applies to me, depending on the game. When the beeps come out, that means the 3 beats, when it gets to 0, my turn is over regardless. And this, the important part, it applies to no one. It just gives me a reminder that, I have to plan my turns out better and don't get into any analysis paralysis problems and all that. But actually there's a benefit to that, because most normal people, they would have a sense of fairness. And if you are applying a 30-second clock on yourself, most of the other people would definitely apply it to themselves. Like, they might not exactly keep it to 30 seconds, let's say for like Carcassonne, but definitely they won't take much longer.
Maybe some of your slow players are playing slow because, the competition's starting to get pretty heated, and maybe even they're starting to take the game pretty personal. I just gotta say, hey, relax, this isn't a tournament. I don't care if I make mistakes. You probably shouldn't care if you make mistakes too, because we're all friends here. We'll laugh about it and have a good time.
I'm kind of the main gamer in my group. I buy all the games. I teach all the games. So for me, it's if I get those new casual players in and I'm trying to get someone who doesn't play a lot of games into it, and there's somebody that has a long turn, it will absolutely kill the game. And those people just say, oh my gosh, this is horrible, I don't want to play again. But the most important thing I think I found is just not getting insulting, because in high school I used to take a long time taking tests, and then you get made fun of. Like, oh, you're stupid, you take forever. Well, no, I just want to make sure I did everything right. So it's not that people are stupid that they're taking long turns, but it's very easy when you've got 4 people at the table picking on somebody to say like, oh man, you're taking forever on your turn, this is horrible. So you gotta be careful with that. If you insult someone, then you're defeating the purpose of playing a game. You're there to have a good time. The stuff that I find works is those reminders to say, like that kind of the passive aggressive stuff that you suggested. I'm just like, oh man, I'm gonna have a great turn next time. This is awesome. Yeah. What are you guys gonna do? Stuff like that. It's cheesy, but it totally works. It gets people thinking about their turn, because they might just have the cards on the table and they're looking around the room or something. So those friendly reminders help a lot. But most importantly, you got to be polite about it. You cross a line and people get insulted, and it's not fun.
Well, come to think of it, I really don't know anybody that really plays slow within my game group. So I'll have to try again another time. Thanks.